What's up guys, welcome back to another GGF video, and today we'll be taking a look at the brand new O11 Dynamic EVO from LIAN Li. Now this case has been in the works for about a year now, and the idea behind this chassis is to give you different fitment options and different case layouts than the previous O11 cases out there. Things like inverted ATX, different GPU locations are just some of the options you can have in this case. Now this video is going to be quite long. There's a lot of options on this case, just not the case itself, but all the optional extras you can pick up for this chassis as well. So I'll grab some snacks, grab something to drink, and let's jump in. But before that, today's video is brought to you by the Thermaltake ARGENT E700 gaming chair. Designed by Studio FA Porsche, the E700 is an ergonomic chair with diverse adjustment options to perfectly support your body. Featuring high quality materials like genuine leather and aluminum, the E700 combines the best of both worlds, gorgeous aesthetics and peak functionality, while coming in 6 color options. Learn more at the link in the description below. We've seen many iterations of the O11 over the past few years, and there's no doubt it's one of the most popular case series of all time. And now we have the O11 Dynamic EVO, and this could be the most versatile one yet. With inverted ATX support, side mounted GPU capabilities, the ability to relocate front I/O and more. Outside aesthetics are clean, and we find that classic O11 look and feel, with a hint of a few changes here and there. The EVO comes in 2 color options like the previous O11 models, a full black option with brushed aluminum top and side fascias, and the snow white variant with painted white aluminum fascia for the fronts and the top. Chassis dimensions come in at 460 high, 285 wide and 465 deep, and it fits in between the O11 Mini and the O11 XL. One major change we find on the exterior are how the side panels attach and detach. On previous O11 models, side panels would slide down and be locked into place by the top cover, meaning you always had to remove the top first, then the other panels. Now this has been simplified, with panels pushing on and pulling off while leaving the top panel on. For extra security for transporting the chassis, the front and main side panel can be locked down from the top. The right side panel follows the same concept but cannot be locked down. I feel this is fine and takes quite a bit of force to pull off. RGB lighting has been included with a single strip down the front. This can be controlled via the built-in buttons on the front panel fascia, or can be offloaded to your motherboard's RGB header. Another feature I absolutely love is how LIAN Li have implemented the front I/O. This module can be removed and relocated to 2 other locations around the edge of the chassis. This process is toolless by lifting the latch and sliding the module out, then adjusting the cable clip as required. The 3 I/O locations include the front left, and the right side at the rear. This module includes a USB 3.1 Type-C, 2 USB 3.0 Type-A, and an audio combo port. LIAN Li even offer an I/O module as an optional extra if you require more front I/O ports, and I'll cover this later on. Power and reset buttons are now moved over to the front fascia, which works well with the front I/O module, as you don't really want your power buttons moving around wherever you decide to place your I/O module. The power button can also be pressed front on or side on. Neat. Moving inside the EVO, and we see a very familiar layout here with the motherboard to the left and the famous O11 side mount for radiator, fans, or in this case, a GPU, and I'll cover the side mounted GPU later on. First off, I want to cover the new toolless radiator bracket. This works very well, and I love that you can now install radiators or fans from the back rather than the front side. Mount your hardware to the bracket, then pop it in from the back. This is great if you already have top and bottom radiators installed in the case. The quick release mechanism for this bracket works a treat as well. This bracket can also be mounted 2 ways, and I want to get this out of the way first, as I refer to this quite a bit during this video. This bracket can be installed in either a front position, as in more towards the main side of the case, and also in a back position, being more towards the rear of the side panel. These 2 options help dramatically with the eATX motherboards, longer GPUs, radiator configs, and FLT pump res combos, and I'll cover all this shortly. Motherboard support is up to eATX, however, eATX boards will slightly extend off the motherboard tray over the side radiator mount. Please note that eATX boards will limit some side radiator support due to the extra length of the motherboard. With an eATX motherboard installed and the side radiator mount bracket in its front position, I had 55mm of clearance to the motherboard for radiator and fans. With the side bracket in its back position, I now had 92mm worth of clearance for radiator and fans. As you can see, with an EK PE360 and fans with the side bracket in its front position, it is a really tight fit and impossible to cable up the motherboard, but with the side bracket in its back position, we now find plenty of room for cabling up the motherboard. Cable grommets are pretty standard for an O11 chassis, and here we find two along the top, two very large ones along the right hand edge of the motherboard, and two large cutouts at the bottom for all your front I/O connections. Around the back of the case we find the traditional O11 styling with that removable cable management bar running top to bottom, but this time LIAN Li have added some extra cable management brackets. I'm not sure how useful these will be, but they can be removed if they get in the way. Velcro ties are also supplied and can be connected to those extra brackets as well. Just one thing to note is that you can't really have the cable management bracket and your power supply next to each other. The concept is to have your PSU and cable management bracket opposite. PSU support is standard ATX, and it's good to see the storage bot can be used for an optional power supply or can be used instead of the bottom position. With the default cable management bar installed, max PSU length is about 185mm. Any longer and this bracket will need to be removed and installed in the other position. Moving on to storage support, and this really blew me away. I legit spent 3 to 4 hours non-stop recording all the different storage locations in the O11 EVO. There's a total of 17 2.5-inch SSD options and 8 3.5-inch hard drive options in the case, but just to note, these are drive locations and not all can be used at once. First off, LIAN Li have once again gone with the 2 drive bay hard drive cage, which is accessed from the rear of the chassis via a small drop down door. This can hold either 2 2.5-inch SSDs or 2 3.5-inch hard drives, and an extra 2.5-inch SSD can be mounted to the side of this cage as well. LIAN Li have listened to feedback, and now an optional 60mm fan can be mounted to this drive cage if using mechanical drives. This whole cage can be also removed if not required. This now frees up room for extra cable management or a second PSU. LIAN Li have included a drive bracket with the EVO and is installed in place of the side radiator bracket. This can hold up to 4 2.5-inch SSDs or 2 3.5-inch hard drives. This bracket pops in and out the same way as the radiator bracket. 2 2.5-inch SSD locations can also be found on the middle cable management bar, which LIAN Li have been doing for quite a while now on their previous O11 cases. The last storage option are where things start to get real crazy. LIAN Li have included 2 bars which attach to the top or bottom radiator brackets. Now I said top or bottom as only 2 bars are included, not 4, so you can only use the bottom bracket or the top bracket, not both, but you probably wouldn't want to use the top anyway. Simply screw the bars onto the radiator bracket, and now we have support for 4 2.5-inch SSDs or 2 3.5-inch hard drives. Moving on to radiator coverage, and being an O11, radiator support once again was very good all round. But first off, I'd like to thank EK Waterblocks for supporting all the gear used for these reviews. I use EK because I feel they're widely accessible and used around the world, and I find their radiators are slightly larger than others. The EVO supports a new mounting style both at the bottom and top with removable radiator brackets. These are both the same, so if they get mixed up, that's fine. The bottom slides in and is locked in via a thumb screw. The top slides in from the inside of the chassis and is locked into place via 2 screws from the top. Just one thing to note with the top bracket, and that is once your radiator is mounted, you do lose access to the left row of radiator screws. This means any slight radiator adjusting once in your case won't be possible. You'll have to remove the bracket, do the adjusting, and pop it back in. Or what I do is leave the row of screws that are going to be covered just loose enough so the radiator can slide. Once it's in the correct location, lock the radiator down with the screws that are visible. For top radiator clearance, I had roughly 84mm here for radiator and fans, and support for up to a 280 or 360mm radiator. I was able to fit in an EK XE360 with fans with my chosen motherboard with just a bit of room spare. Bottom clearance is up to 125mm with a GPU installed in the first 16-by slot, which was the second top PCI slot in the case. The bottom also supports up to 280 or 360mm radiators. Here I was able to fit in an EK XE360 with fans, no issues at all, as the radiator can run up past the motherboard if not using any other PCIe slots. Moving on to side radiator support, and there are many factors to consider here. First off, with shorter GPUs, 265mm or less won't interfere with the side mount, meaning the side radiator thickness will only be limited by the top and bottom radiators. With the side bracket in its front position, there is roughly 82mm of clearance for radiator and fans. With the bracket in its back position, there is now 120mm for radiator and fans. The side radiator bracket can support up to 280 or 360mm radiators. Now if using longer GPUs more than 265mm, it will run over the side radiator location. In this case, with the side bracket in its front position, there is roughly 70mm of clearance for radiator and fans. With the side bracket in its back position, there is 110mm for radiator and fans. I feel even with long GPUs, 110mm with the side bracket in its back position is going to be more than enough for most people. I was able to fit an EK-XE360 with fans, no issues at all, on the side mount. The side radiator bracket can also be used for EK-FLT pump combos, but can only be used with this bracket in the front position. This gives us 45mm of clearance in the back chamber for either DDC or D5 pumps from the FLT. Here I was able to install an EK-XE360 with fans at the top and the bottom of the EVO with an EK360 D5 FLT in the side location. Or you can even install radiators in the back chamber with ports facing to the main chamber. I was able to fit an EK-PE360 in the rear chamber and fans in the main chamber with the side radiator bracket in its front position. With the side radiator bracket in its back position, there are really no mounting options in the rear chamber as the bracket is pushed all the way back. Just a note on this is the side radiator bracket does have cutouts for radiator ports to poke through if installing a radiator in the back chamber. I was only able to fit EK-PE 120 rad sizing ports through this cutout and not 140 rad sizing. The width of this cutout is 90mm. Here's a final shot of max radiator configurations in all locations. An EK-XE 60mm thick 360 with fans at the top, bottom and side. Pretty insane. Max GPU width is 150mm and I had no issues fitting my PowerColor 6900 XT Liquid Devil. Now let's take a look at flipping the chassis for an inverted layout. To get started, I would suggest having an empty case and removing all radiator brackets, both top panels and the hard drive cage. It's best to do this as the base tray will be removed and applied to the top and we don't want any radiator bracket screws stuck under. Next we need to remove the front I/O module, unscrew the cable bracket and feed the cables out the bottom hole as this will be reinstalled on the opposite side later. At the back bottom, undo the 2 thumb screws and push the chassis forward to unhinge it from the base and lift it off. This will remove the base of the EVO. Before we install the base on top of the chassis, we first need to remove the PSU support bracket. This can only be done at this point of time as its screws are only accessible once the base is off. Unscrew it from the bottom, rotate the bracket and screw it in at the top. We can now install the base back on the top of the chassis and lock it back in place, flip the case over and now we have the inverted layout. Feed the front I/O module cables through the hole that goes to the rear chamber, then lock the module into your desired spot. Finally, install the radiator brackets, top panels and hard drive cage back into place. In the inverted layout, all radiator clearances and support stay the same, but the only thing that does change is the 360 FLT pump res support. Now that the case has been flipped, the 360 FLT pump res will technically only fit upside down, which is how you saw it installed before in the standard layout, but obviously you cannot run it like this. Rotating the FLT round causes the pump to fail on the support bar and pushing the FLT up higher causes it to fail on the top of the chassis. One option is to cut the support bar out of the way or just go with the 240 FLT pump res combo, which installed fine. As you can see in the inverted layout, I was still able to fit 3 EK-XE360 radiators with fans. LIAN Li have once again included their anti-sag GPU bracket. They've been including this in some of their previous cases and it's also sold separately. This is probably my favourite anti-sag bracket on the market. It's very easy to use, very low profile, nearly impossible to see, and once installed, your GPU is rock solid. Alrighty, for those of you still watching, thank you for sticking around as that's most of the case covered. Now let's take a look at all the optional extras available for the O11 EVO. These include a vertical 3-slot PCIe 4 GPU kit, upright 3-slot PCIe 4 GPU kit, additional I/O module kit, front mesh kit, and top I/O kit. Starting with the vertical GPU kit, this is pretty straightforward and allows you to vertically mount your GPU. This kit and the EVO has specifically been designed together for best fitment and clearances. This mount supports 3-slot GPUs and has a second mounting point if using a 2-slot GPU. In its default position, there is 50mm under for radiator and fans, but in its upper position, we can now remove part of the chassis and install the bracket 2 slots up, giving us 90mm of clearance under for radiator and fans. I found sag wasn't too bad, especially in its top position. Just keep in mind in its high position, the GPU does come up close to your CPU block. Next up is the upright GPU kit, and probably the most interesting one. Mount the bracket to the 4 allocated holes at the top of the chassis, Undo the 2 locking screws from the bracket and slide it out. You can now mount your GPU to the bracket and slide the bracket back on. It's also a good point now to feed your display cable through as well. Those running water-cooled hard loop builds, you probably don't need to do this, but LIAN LI have added an L-type support bar which attaches near the bottom on your GPU to prevent any wobbling. As you can see, our GPU has quite a bit of wobble, and it really comes down to the GPU you're using, as the wobble was coming from the rear I/O bracket on the GPU. This extra support bar uses a supplied side hard drive bracket with a right angle adapter which sandwiches the GPU between. Now you can see there is absolutely zero wobble, and I can even drag the case along. All that's left is installing the riser cable, and this part really got me. Straight away I assumed the cable would run behind the motherboard in the back chamber and out the bottom then into the motherboard, but nope, as the cable isn't long enough, it has to run past the memory to your PCIe slot. LIAN LI do supply a few zip ties to make it look a bit better. LIAN LI state they couldn't make this cable any longer due to Gen 4 standards. Although I haven't properly tested myself, Thermaltake does make a 60cm Gen 4 riser cable, which is what I've used in my build, and this allows the cable to run behind the back chamber completely out of sight. Another option is joining another Gen 4 riser cable onto the supplied LIAN LI one to extend it around the back. The upright GPU kit also works when the case is in its inverted orientation as well. And now with a water block GPU, it's looking really good with the riser cable completely hidden. Running a GPU in this upright configuration isn't just for looks. For a custom loop build, and in this setup our top and bottom radiators now have complete unrestricted airflow from bottom to top. The upright GPU kit can also work well with the next optional accessory, and that's a front mesh kit, which essentially makes this an O11 EVO. As the name states, this replaces the stock front glass panel with a full front mesh panel. Rails are also provided for radiator and fan support. This can give extra airflow when using air-cooled video cards in the upright GPU location. One thing to note with this front mesh kit and using the upright GPU kit are compatibility issues between fans and using the L-type support bar on the GPU. You may find this support bracket will have to go either at the bottom of the fans or in between the fans. LIAN LI have done a very detailed manual explaining all this, which I'll link below. My GPU is about 105mm wide, and as you can see, only 120mm fans will fit. 140mm fans would definitely fail on the L bracket. But with a bit of brainstorming, I managed to install this L-shaped bracket from under the GPU rather than the side. There's enough holes in the back hard drive bracket that I managed to pick one up in the perfect spot, and after a quick adjustment, it was back in place holding the GPU. Now I have room to mount 140mm fans. If you wish to install a radiator on the front mesh kit, it will severely eat into top and bottom radiator spots. With a 360 radiator installed at the top and bottom of the chassis, the front mesh kit really only has enough room for fans only. Another optional accessory is the additional I/O kit. Pretty self-explanatory, this kit just adds more front I/O to the chassis. This kit comes with the same USB ports but minus the audio combo ports. This can come in handy as many motherboards are starting to come out with dual USB 3 and Type-C front panel headers. The final optional accessory is the top I/O kit. This simply removes the stock top fascia with a replacement one which has a cutout. This then allows the front I/O module to be installed or an additional I/O module to be used in conjunction with the stock front I/O. All these optional extras come in either white or black depending on the case color you've gone with. Alrighty, so that is most of the case covered there. Now that did go for a bit longer than I anticipated for, so I hope you guys didn't fall asleep. So I have done a build in this chassis, so let's check it out. So that is the final build in the O11 EVO. Now that was the white chassis. I was really happy with how this came out. I went with a white and copper theme, as you can see, and I'll talk a little bit about this build later on, and I'll also talk about the build I'm going to do in the black version as well. Now just some other things before I wrap this up and come down to the price and so on. The inverted 360 FLT issue where it was hitting the bottom little bar on that removable bracket. I did miss that you could use the little stand-up brackets that come with all the EK FLT 360s. That will bulk it out a bit, so that allows the pump not to protrude into the back, but it will make the FLT come into the main chamber a bit more, and then you may have issues with fitting the ports and so on when you've got your rads in the top and the bottom. So definitely, if I do use an FLT in this build, I'm going to do the inverted layout. I will probably cut that little bar out at the bottom just to make it that little bit more cleaner. Now there is a dust filter. There's only one dust filter. It is added in the bottom. The reason why I didn't show it during the previous shots is it just kept on falling out. It is magnetic. It has to be in the exact right moment, and as soon as you knock the case, it does fall out. So if you do use this, either LIAN LI need to make this a little bit stronger, or if you are going to use it, just probably put a little bit of tape on two of the corners or so on to hold it in place if you do want to use it. Side distros from companies like Bits Power or EK and so on. I feel that the G1 EK distro will probably fit. They do a distro plate. I don't have it on hand, sorry. I do have one coming, but it hasn't arrived in time for me to fit this. But as soon as it does arrive, I'll probably update the description just to let you guys know if that one does fit in this case. I think it will. This is very similar to the original O11, and that's what that distro plate was designed for. Another thing I missed, the new cable management bracket. I did remove it for this build, and I do feel a lot of you probably will remove it as well, because you do have that one at the very back that runs down the middle, which I do like. This can either go up and down in two spots. So depending whether you have your power supply at the bottom, this will be at the top, or if you have your PSU at the top, this will be at the bottom. And the top IO kit, I did miss that. The reason why LIAN LI have gone with this optional extra, which you can get, is I've listened to feedback, and a lot of you guys still put your case on the floor, and instead of running your cables either from the front or out the back, this top IO bracket up here being on the floor, this will just be sitting right down beside you, and you can plug in either your headphones or your USB and so on. Now my only recommendation for the O11 EVO, I really couldn't find any flaws. The only thing would be maybe a res or pump support around the back above the power supply. As you can see with this build, I really didn't want to add a pump res combo anywhere inside here. I wanted to go with an elegant look with this slightly curved copper, and I think adding a distro, a pump, a res somewhere, and there isn't really a spot to put it with this layout I've done, it just would have ruined the whole look. So I just simply stuck it on top of the power supply with a bunch of double-sided tape. Now it is super strong, it's not going anywhere, but I feel they need a more user-friendly option. Maybe a panel can slide in behind the motherboard, and then that would allow you to have some holes to mount, say, reservoirs or pumps and so on, because there is about 230 millimeters above the power supply, which is enough room for a lot of pump res combos. As I used the heat killer, that is 100, the heat killer 100, that's 100 millimeter for the tube res, then a little bit more for the DDC top at the bottom of that. So yeah, definitely something to look into to add for that. That would pretty much complete this chassis. Now, I had an absolute pleasure building in this chassis. I couldn't really find any flaws, like I said before. LIAN LI have gone with this route for adding a heap of options, the inverted layout and so on, because LIAN LI hear things around the net. I've seen a lot of these comments around when someone shares their O11 build. The top comment I see is everyone just saying, oh, yep, that's another O11 build, move on. So LIAN LI want to mix that up a bit. They don't want to see that standard O11 layout with a side distro in the ATX layout and all the tubes running. This case gives you the options with the inverted layout, gives you the options to move the GPU, just gives you all that flexibility to create something different, and you can just experiment and go from there. You don't have to go out with the upright GPU bracket like I've done here, but you can still get that inverted layout just without purchasing any optional extras. Now, talking about my build, as you can see it is here, I did go with a raw copper look. It's the first time I have used this copper, and I went with these slightly curved bends rather than 90-degree bends, I will be doing 90-degree bends in this one. I'll go with a copper theme as well. I'll do a black and copper theme in this one. I went with the white and copper theme in this one. I think the slightly curved bends gave it that more elegant look, and there were only 3 bends, so I think having 3 90s, probably like a 90 here, a 90 here somehow, and then a 90 there, might have looked a little bit off because I would have had to add a few extra fittings to extend that out. In terms of bending this copper, I did just use a spare tire, and just wrapped it around. You don't need any tools for these slight bends. When you're doing 90s, you do need a bender, and it does get a little bit more tricky. In terms of this copper, how clean it came out, I'll show you some shots of this copper. First of all, I went to my hardware store to get some standard copper. It is 1/2 inch, 12.7mm outer diameter, so you will need special fittings. A lot of the popular water cooling companies don't do the right fittings for these. Most do 12, 14 or 16. You need something like 1/2 inch fittings or 12.7mm. I went with Monsoon. I know pretty much you'll do them as well. But in terms of this tubing, the stuff I got from my hardware store was really dirty, really messy. It had a seam down it, and it had writing stamped into the copper, which I could not get out. I sanded it for days and could not get it out. So I ended up Googling and found some refrigeration copper. This is basically seamless. It had writing inked on, so I could sand it off. And once I worked on it a bit, I think I started with 600 grit sandpaper, 1200, 2000, 3000, and then polished it. It came out absolutely perfect. And then I clear coated it. I clear coated it matte. I did that for 2 reasons. I like the matte look. It's not as glossy. It's much easier to film, and I think it's a much more nicer on the eyes. And also clear coating it will stop any oxidization, so you won't get after a few days blemishes in it and so on. Because I did some test pieces. I polished these up a few weeks ago. I just let them sit in my garage for a bit, and they did start to oxidize, and that's something I really didn't want to happen with this build. Some other things I did, I added a PCI Express cover. As you can see, there is nothing plugged into this board. Well, that's what you think. The actual riser cable runs down in the second slot. Yes, it is 8x only, but it is Gen 4 8x, which would be enough for this 6900 XT. And then I wanted to just finish it off by making my own aluminum cover plate for that top slot, so it just wasn't bare sticking there. So I have done a time-lapse build. You do see a little bit more on this build there, so I will release that in a few days, and then I'll release the black build probably a week after that. And then basically I went with heat killer all round for the pump res combo, all the blocks, the radiators, and then bits power for the fittings, and then Monsoon for the very end fittings for the hard tube, because not many brands do that 1/2 inch fittings for the tubing. Now let's talk about price. Price and pre-orders. So price, you're looking at $170 US for the black version, which is this one of course, and then you're looking at $180 US for the white, and there's apparently going to be a Harbor Grey. I haven't seen that yet, but that should look pretty cool. Pre-orders will start late December, early January, and there is a $20 pre-order discount for the black and white models of this case. So if you're interested, jump in early and you'll save 20 bucks. But that's pretty much it on this video. It has gone for a very long time, and I do apologize for some of you guys that may have got bored or whatnot, but I did want to cover everything in this case. I just didn't want to sit here. A lot of my reviews on these cases aren't just sitting here and just pointing out different aspects of the case, what would fit there, what would go there. Actually measuring all the different options in this case, the radiator fitment and so on, does take a lot of time. So I do hope you enjoy these videos. I do want to thank LIAN LI for sending these out for me to build in. I want to thank BitsPower and Heat Killer for sponsoring the water cooling in these builds. And I want to thank you guys for watching, and see you next time.